Indian billionaire gets lost in Mumbai's poorest neighborhood. While being chased by thieves, he has his heart stolen by a SARI artisan who saves him from worse. Welcome to Billionaires and Hearts. Before we dive into today's emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to stay updated. We'd love to hear your first impressions, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think as you watch. And if you enjoy our stories, please like and share this video with your friends. Now let's get started. The chaos of Mumbai's streets swallowed Inder Bajaj whole as he sprinted through the narrow gullies of Dharavi. His expensive silk kurta clung to his body, drenched in sweat, and his lungs burned with each desperate breath. Behind him, the shouts of his pursuers grew louder, their footsteps echoing against the corrugated metal walls of the slum dwellings. "He went this way. Don't lose him," Inder cursed under his breath. How had a simple incognito visit to explore potential development sites turned into this nightmare? The three men had been following him since he'd stepped out of his chauffeur-driven Mercedes several streets back, insisting his driver wait while he took what he'd intended to be a brief walk. His security detail would be searching frantically for him by now, but in the labyrinthine streets of Asia's largest slum, finding him would be nearly impossible. The thieves had cornered him quickly, demanding his wallet, phone, and the gold Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist, a timepiece worth more than what most Dharavi residents would earn in several lifetimes. In a moment of foolish pride, he had refused, shoving one of them aside and making a desperate dash into the maze of alleys. It was a decision he now deeply regretted as his designer shoes slipped on the damp ground. Turning a sharp corner, Inder found himself facing a dead end, a brick wall covered in vibrant but peeling paint. The voices behind him grew closer. He spun around, frantically searching for an escape route, when suddenly a small wooden door to his right swung open. "In here, quickly!" A woman's voice, urgent but melodic, called to him. Without hesitation, Inder lunged toward the door, practically falling inside as the woman quickly pulled it shut behind him. The room was dim, illuminated only by the light filtering through a small window and the colorful fabric that seemed to cover every surface. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, placing a finger to her lips. Inder nodded, struggling to catch his breath as he took in his surroundings and his savior. She was draped in a simple cotton sari of deep crimson with intricate golden threadwork bordering its edges. Despite the simplicity of her attire, she carried herself with an innate grace that commanded attention. Her large, expressive eyes held a quiet strength, and her long hair was tied back in a practical braid adorned with jasmine flowers. She couldn't have been much younger than him, yet there was a timeless quality to her beauty that made it difficult to look away. They listened as the footsteps of his pursuers approached, paused briefly outside the door, and then continued down the alley, their voices fading into the distance. "Thank you," Inder finally managed, straightening his disheveled kurta. "You may have saved my life." She regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You clearly don't belong here," she said, her English perfect but accented with the lyrical cadence of Marathi. "Those men, they are not good people. What business brings someone like you to Dharavi?" The direct question caught him off guard. Most people who recognized his wealth and his kurta alone would have cost several months of an average worker's salary, would be deferential, eager to please. This woman seemed unimpressed, perhaps even disapproving. "I'm Inder Bajaj," he said, as if the name alone would explain everything. Her expression remained unchanged. "I'm Priya Nair," she replied simply. "That doesn't answer my question." The realization that his name meant nothing to her was strangely refreshing. Outside these slum walls, the Bajaj name opened doors, commanded respect, and frequently made headlines in business journals. His family's real estate empire had transformed Mumbai's skyline, with luxury developments replacing older, inefficient neighborhoods not unlike this one. "I was surveying the area," he said vaguely. Priya's eyes narrowed slightly. "For what purpose? More demolition? More families displaced for your glass towers?" So she did know who he was, or at least what he represented. The accusation in her voice was unmistakable, but before he could defend himself, a sudden commotion outside drew their attention. "They're coming back," Priya whispered, moving toward the door. "Stay here." She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Through the thin wooden panels, Inder could hear her speaking confidently to the men, her voice firm but polite, directing them toward another area of the slum. A few moments later, she returned. "They're gone for now, but it's not safe for you to leave yet," she said. "They'll be watching the main paths out of Dharavi." As his racing heart finally began to slow, Inder took in his surroundings. The small room was both a living space and a workshop. Brilliant fabrics in jewel tones hung from the ceiling and were stacked in neat piles against the walls. In one corner, a small loom stood with a half-finished piece of cloth stretched across it, golden threads catching what little light filtered through the window. "You're a weaver," he said, moving closer to examine the delicate work. "I'm a SARI artisan," Priya corrected, a hint of pride entering her voice. "My family has been creating hand-woven saris for 7 generations. This design will take nearly 3 months to complete." Inder reached out, stopping just short of touching the fabric when Priya gave him a warning look. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary," he said sincerely. "I've seen saris worth lakhs of rupees in boutiques that don't have this level of detail." A small smile softened her features, transforming her face and making her even more striking. "Those boutiques mark up their prices tenfold and give almost nothing to the actual artisans. We sell directly to the families who commission our work. Each sari tells a story. This one will be worn by a bride from a family that has used our services for 3 generations." As she spoke about her craft, her initial hostility melted away, replaced by a passion that animated her every gesture. Inder found himself captivated, not just by her beauty, but by the pride and purpose that seemed to radiate from her. "You must think this place primitive," she said, gesturing to the modest space around them. "But there is dignity in this work, in creating something with your hands that brings beauty into the world." "I don't think it's primitive at all," Inder replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. "I think it's remarkable." Their eyes met, and for a moment, a current of understanding passed between them. Then Priya looked away, moving to a small clay pot heating on a portable stove. "You should have some chai while we wait for things to calm down outside," she said, her tone businesslike once more. As she poured the fragrant tea into 2 simple clay cups, Inder was struck by the strangeness of his situation. Just hours ago, he had been in his penthouse office, surrounded by gleaming marble and glass, making million-dollar decisions with a single signature. Now he was hiding in a slum, drinking chai with a woman who clearly disapproved of everything he represented. Yet somehow, this tiny room with its explosion of color and life felt more real than the sterile luxury he was accustomed to. And this woman, with her forthright manner and skilled hands, intrigued him in a way that the polished socialites who usually surrounded him never had. "Tell me more about your work," he said, accepting the cup she offered. Priya studied him for a moment, as if trying to determine whether his interest was genuine. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she began to speak, her words weaving a picture as intricate as her creations. Outside, the sun began to set over Mumbai, casting long shadows through the cramped alleys of Dharavi. But inside Priya's workshop, surrounded by threads of gold and silk, Inder Bajaj, heir to one of India's greatest fortunes, found himself forgetting about the world beyond these walls, lost in a new kind of wealth he had never before recognized. The next morning, Inder's chauffeur pulled the sleek Mercedes to a stop outside the Bajaj Industries headquarters, a gleaming 60-story tower that dominated Mumbai's skyline. The building was a testament to the Bajaj family's power and wealth, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of prosperity. "Sir, your meeting with the board begins in 30 minutes, his assistant, Rahul, reminded him as they strode through the marble-floored lobby. Employees bowed their heads respectfully as Inder passed, his tailored navy blue business suit and crisp white shirt, a stark contrast to the simple kurta he had worn the previous day. But Inder barely registered the deference around him. His mind was still in Dharavi, still sitting in Priya's small workshop surrounded by vibrant fabrics and the scent of cardamom chai. After ensuring it was safe, Priya had guided him out of Dharavi after nightfall, expertly navigating through the labyrinthine alleys until they reached a main road where he could call his driver. She had refused his offers of money as thanks, her chin lifting with a pride that no amount of wealth could purchase. "I didn't help you for payment," she had said firmly. "I would have done the same for anyone in danger." Now, sitting in his opulent corner office, with its panoramic view of the Arabian Sea, Inder found himself unable to focus on the stack of contracts before him. The business proposal, a luxury residential complex that would require demolishing an old neighborhood, suddenly seemed hollow. "Rahul, what do you know about the textile artisans of Dharavi?" he asked suddenly. His assistant looked up, surprised. "Sir, the SARI weavers, the artisans who create hand-woven saris." Rahul adjusted his glasses. "I believe they're quite renowned, though their numbers are dwindling. Machine-made saris from factories have made it difficult for traditional artisans to compete." Inder leaned forward. "I want to learn more, set up a meeting with our Cultural Preservation Foundation, and clear my afternoon schedule." "Sir, the board meeting—" "I'll attend the board meeting. Just clear my afternoon." A few hours later, dressed once again in a simple but elegant kurta, Inder found himself standing outside Priya's door in Dharavi. This time, he had come alone, dismissing his security detail despite their protests. He knocked hesitantly, suddenly unsure of himself, a sensation entirely foreign to a man who commanded boardrooms with ease. When the door opened, Priya's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" she asked, looking past him as if expecting to see bulldozers and demolition crews. "I wanted to thank you properly," Inder said, "and I was hoping you might tell me more about your craft." Priya studied him skeptically. Why would Inder Bajaj, whose company is known for replacing old neighborhoods with luxury skyscrapers, be interested in traditional textile arts? "Perhaps because I met someone who made me see things differently," he replied honestly. A moment passed between them, tension gradually giving way to curiosity. Finally, Priya stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Inside, the workshop looked different in daylight. Sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air and bringing the colors of the fabrics to vibrant life. Priya had been working at her loom, and the sari she was creating was even more magnificent than Inder had remembered. "You're really here to learn?" she asked, still wary but softening slightly. "I am," Inder nodded, his gaze sincere. "Show me." What began as a tentative conversation gradually transformed into hours of immersion in Priya's world. She showed him how each thread was selected for its quality and color, how designs were planned for months before weaving began, and how some of the most intricate patterns had been passed down through generations, with each family of artisans having their own signature styles. "This is real wealth," Priya said, running her fingers over a completed sari of deep emerald green with gold and silver embellishments. "Not money, but knowledge that has survived hundreds of years. Each motif tells a story. This peacock represents new beginnings. These flowers symbolize prosperity. This pattern wards off evil." As the afternoon sun began to wane, Priya brewed chai, and they sat together on the small woven mat that served as her living room. "My family couldn't afford to send me to university," she explained, "but my grandmother taught me everything she knew about weaving. When she passed away, she left me her loom and her patterns. It's more valuable than any degree." "Yet many of these arts are disappearing," Inder observed. Priya's expression grew somber. "Young people want modern jobs in offices like yours, and who can blame them? Her weaver can spend months on a single sari, only to have middlemen take most of the profit. Many families have sold their looms and moved on. But not you." "No." Her eyes met his, fierce with determination. "Not me, but it's becoming harder. The community of weavers here in Dharavi supports each other, shares resources, preserves techniques. If this area is demolished for another luxury complex—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her implication was clear. The shame that swept through Inder was unexpected. How many neighborhoods had his company destroyed without ever considering the cultural heritage being lost? How many communities like Priya's had been scattered to the winds, their collective knowledge fragmented and diluted? What if there was a way to preserve these arts while improving living conditions, he asked, an idea beginning to form. Priya laughed without humor. Developers always promise that. The reality is different. I'm not just any developer, Inder said, surprising himself with his determination. I have the resources to make real change. And why would you? What does Inder Bajaj gain from helping SARI weavers in Dharavi? Their eyes locked, and Inder found himself unable to look away from her challenging gaze. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through power and money, but Priya could not be impressed by either. It was both frustrating and exhilarating. Perhaps I'm discovering that there are things of value that can't be bought or sold, he said finally. Things worth preserving. A hint of a smile touched Priya's lips, transforming her face in a way that made Inder's heart race unexpectedly. Now that, she said softly, is a beginning of wisdom. As weeks passed, Inder became a regular visitor to Dharavi. Under Priya's guidance, he met with other master artisans. Not just sari weavers, but potters, embroiderers, and leather workers, all practicing crafts that had been honed over centuries. He learned about their challenges, their dreams, and their fears of displacement. Meanwhile, in the gleaming offices of Bajaj Industries, Inder began working on a revolutionary proposal. Late into the night, he pored over architectural plans, financial projections, and community development strategies. The board members were perplexed by his sudden interest in cultural preservation, but none dared question the heir too directly. Priya, however, remained skeptical. I've seen developers come with grand promises before, she reminded him during one of his visits. She was teaching him the basics of the loom that day, guiding his inexpert hands as he attempted to follow the intricate pattern. I understand your doubt, Inder replied, focusing intently on not making a mistake in the delicate weave. But I'm not asking you to trust my words. Soon I'll have something concrete to show you. Their fingers brushed as she corrected his technique, and both pretended not to notice the electric current that seemed to pass between them. Their worlds remained fundamentally separate, yet Inder found himself increasingly drawn to the authenticity of Priya's life, the honest labor of her hands, the community bonds that sustained her, and the unwavering principles that guided her decisions. In her presence, the trappings of his wealth felt hollow. He began dressing more simply, listening more deeply, and questioning the values that had shaped his life until now. The change did not go unnoticed in his social circles. Inder, darling, you've become positively ascetic, commented Natasha Mehta, daughter of one of Mumbai's most prominent families, at a charity gala. Whatever happened to that diamond cufflink set I gifted you? I've found that simplicity has its own elegance, he replied, uncomfortable with the ostentatious display of wealth around him in a way he never had been before. Later that evening, his father cornered him by the bar. Vikram Bajaj was in his 60s but stood straight as a sword, his silver hair and beard impeccably groomed, his eyes sharp with the calculation that had built their empire. What's this I hear about you spending time in Dharavi? Vikram demanded, keeping his voice low. The board is concerned. Inder, your behavior has become erratic. I'm researching a new development concept, Inder replied carefully. Something that could transform our company's approach and public image. Our approach has built this empire, his father reminded him sternly. Your grandfather started with nothing, and now the Bajaj name is synonymous with success. Don't forget what matters. As his father walked away, Inder was struck by the irony. It was precisely because of Priya that he was beginning to understand what truly mattered. And it wasn't the wealth and status his family had pursued for generations. The next day, Inder arrived at Priya's workshop with nervous energy. I need to show you something, he said. Can you come with me? Priya hesitated, setting aside the gold thread she had been working with. Where? To Bajaj Industries. I have something important to share with you, but it needs to be seen, not just described. Curiosity warred with caution on her face. Finally, she nodded, draping a simple but elegant mustard-colored dupatta over her shoulders. The drive from Dharavi to the Bajaj headquarters highlighted the stark contrast between their worlds. As the car moved from narrow, crowded streets to wide boulevards lined with modern buildings, Priya grew quieter, observing the transformation of the city around them. When they arrived at the gleaming tower, employees stared openly at the striking woman in the traditional salwar kameez walking alongside their CEO. Priya held her head high, meeting their curious gazes with dignity. In the main conference room, Inder closed the doors and unveiled large architectural renderings that covered the walls. "This is what I've been working on," he explained, his voice tense with anticipation. "The Dharavi Cultural Heritage District. Instead of demolishing and displacing, we rebuild while preserving. Modern, safe housing and workspaces designed specifically for artisans, with community areas for teaching, exhibitions, and direct sales to eliminate middlemen. Solar power, clean water systems, and proper ventilation, but with the community structure intact." Priya moved slowly around the room, studying the detailed plans with an unreadable expression. The renderings showed buildings that harmoniously blended modern amenities with traditional architectural elements, creating spaces where artisans could live and work with dignity while maintaining their cultural heritage. "The key difference is that residents would own their spaces, not rent them," Inder continued. "We would establish a foundation to provide interest-free loans, and artisans could pay through a combination of money and teaching the next generation. It's not charity. It's investment in irreplaceable cultural capital." When Priya finally turned to face him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But why? Inder, why would Bajaj Industries do this when luxury developments bring so much more profit?" Inder stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Not everything valuable can be measured in profit margins. Some things, some people, change how you see the world." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. For a moment, it seemed Inder might bridge the final distance between them, but Priya stepped back, composing herself. "Your vision is wonderful," she said carefully. "But your board, your father, will they approve this?" Inder's expression hardened with determination. "That's my next challenge. The board meets tomorrow to review the proposal." What he didn't tell her was how much he had personally invested in this project, financially and emotionally. If the board rejected it, he was prepared to break with Bajaj Industries entirely and pursue the development independently. The thought should have terrified him, walking away from his inheritance, his family legacy. But somehow, standing here with Priya, it felt like the most natural decision in the world. As they left the building together, neither noticed Vikram Bajaj watching from his office window above, his expression dark with displeasure, as he observed his son and the woman who seemed to be pulling him away from everything the Bajaj family had built. That evening, as Inder returned Priya to Dharavi, an unusual tension hung between them. Standing at her door, Priya finally broke the silence. "What you're trying to do, it matters, regardless of what happens tomorrow," she said. "You've listened when others would not hear us." "You opened my eyes, Priya," he replied. "I can never close them again." Their eyes held for a long moment, both aware of the growing connection between them, both unsure if it could exist across the chasms that separated their worlds. As Inder turned to leave, Priya suddenly touched his arm. "Wait." She disappeared into her workshop, returning moments later with a small square of fabric, exquisitely woven with gold and crimson threads. "This is the first piece I ever completed on my own," she said, pressing it into his hand. "My grandmother kept it to remind me that every master begins as a novice. Perhaps it will bring you clarity tomorrow." Inder's fingers closed around the precious gift, understanding its profound significance. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. As he walked away, the piece of fabric seemed to burn in his hand, a tangible connection to Priya and everything she represented. Tomorrow would determine not just the fate of his proposal, but perhaps the direction of his life. For the first time, the heir to the Bajaj fortune was prepared to risk everything for something that couldn't be bought or sold, a vision of a different world, and the woman who had shown it to him. The boardroom of Bajaj Industries fell silent as Inder concluded his presentation. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the faces of 12 board members whose expressions ranged from skepticism to outright disapproval. The elaborate model of the Dharavi Cultural Heritage District stood in the center of the polished mahogany table, its innovative design combining modern amenities with traditional architecture, now casting long shadows across the financial reports before them. Inder's father, Vikram, sat at the head of the table, his face an impenetrable mask. Throughout the presentation, he had remained silent, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes evaluating not just the proposal, but his son. "Thank you for this creative concept, Inder," said Rajesh Malhotra, the oldest board member, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "However, the profit margins on this project are significantly lower than our standard developments. The Bajaj name is synonymous with luxury. This proposal seems more like charity than business." "It's not charity," Inder countered, standing tall in his simple yet elegant ivory kurta. "It's innovation. The Dharavi Cultural Heritage District would preserve irreplaceable artistic traditions while creating sustainable housing and workspaces. The positive publicity alone would be invaluable. And the long-term cultural significance." "Cultural significance doesn't pay dividends," interrupted Natasha Mehta's father, adjusting his gold cufflinks with a dismissive flick. "The land in Dharavi is prime real estate. Our investors expect maximum returns." Inder had anticipated this resistance, but the cavalier dismissal still made his jaw tighten. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against the small square of fabric Priya had given him. The touch centered him, reminded him of what was at stake. "What if we could have both?" he proposed. "The cultural district would occupy only 30% of our Dharavi holdings. The remaining 70% could still be developed as planned, with luxury residences and commercial spaces. The proximity to authentic cultural experiences would actually increase the value of those properties." This caught their attention. Several board members exchanged thoughtful glances. "Even with that adjustment," said the company's chief financial officer, "we'd still see a 15% reduction in overall profit compared to our original plans, which we would recoup through increased brand value and corporate social responsibility benefits," Inder replied smoothly. "Try not to mention the tax incentives for heritage preservation." The debate continued, with arguments growing increasingly technical. Throughout it all, Inder Bajaj remained silent, his expression unreadable, until finally he raised his hand, instantly silencing the room. "My son has presented an unusual vision," he said, his deep voice commanding attention, "one that challenges our established business model." He paused, eyes fixing on Inder. "Before we vote, I'd like to understand one thing, Inder. Why this sudden interest in artisans and cultural preservation? What is your true motivation?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Inder knew that his father suspected the real reason, or rather the real person, behind his transformation. For a moment, he considered giving the safe answer, talking about corporate responsibility and brand positioning. But as his fingers touched Priya's woven gift once more, he chose honesty. "I've seen another way of measuring value," he said simply. "These artisans create beauty that has survived centuries, while much of what we build is designed to be replaced in decades. Their knowledge is their wealth, passed down through generations. And yes, someone helped me see this. Someone who refused to be impressed by the Bajaj name or wealth, who judged me only by my actions and the vision I'm willing to fight for." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Vikram's eyes narrowed slightly. But there was something else there too, a fleeting expression that might have been respect. "I see," said Vikram finally. "Then let us vote." The minutes that followed determined not just the fate of Dharavi's artisans, but the direction of Inder's life. As the votes were tallied, Inder stood firm, prepared to accept whatever consequences came. "The vote is 8-5 in favor of the modified proposal," announced the secretary, sounding somewhat surprised herself. Relief flooded through Inder, but it was tempered by the knowledge that his father's vote would have been among the 5 against. Their eyes met across the table, a silent acknowledgement of the rift between them, and perhaps also a grudging respect. As the board members filed out, Vikram remained seated, motioning for Inder to stay behind. When they were alone, the older man rose slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the Mumbai skyline, a city he had helped shape. "You risked much for this project," Vikram said, his back still turned. "Were you prepared to lose everything if the vote had gone against you?" Inder stood his ground. "I was. For a vision. Or for a woman?" "Both," Inder answered honestly. "Priya showed me what I was blind to, but this vision goes beyond her. It's about what kind of legacy I want to build. Vikram turned, studying his son with new eyes. You know, your grandfather, my father, began as a textile trader before he moved into real estate. His first shop was not far from Dharavi. This was a story Inder had never heard before. I didn't know that. There is much about our family history you don't know, Vikram said, a hint of melancholy in his voice. In our pursuit of progress, we sometimes forget our origins. He paused, then added, I would like to meet this woman who has influenced my son so profoundly. The request, or perhaps command, caught Inder by surprise. You want to meet Priya? Is that her name? Vikram nodded slowly. Yes, arrange it. Soon. That evening, as the golden light of sunset bathed Dharavi in a warm glow, Inder made his way through the now familiar alleys to Priya's workshop. Children played cricket in a narrow lane, cheering as he passed. Shopkeepers nodded in recognition. The billionaire's son had become an unlikely but accepted presence in their community. When Priya opened her door, her expression immediately shifted from welcome to concern. What happened? She asked, ushering him inside. Did the board? They approved it, Inder said, his smile breaking through. A modified version, but the Cultural Heritage District will become reality. The artisan workshops, the ownership program, the teaching spaces, all of it. Priya's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief and joy. How? I was certain they would refuse. I found a compromise that protected enough of their profits while preserving what matters most, he explained, taking a seat on the woven mat where they had shared so many conversations. But there's something else. My father wants to meet you. The joy in Priya's eyes immediately gave way to apprehension. Why would Vikram Bajaj want to meet me? He knows you've influenced me. The way I think, the way I see our company's role. Inder hesitated, then added, and I think he suspects how I feel about you. The words hung between them, finally acknowledging what had been growing for weeks. Priya looked away, her fingers automatically reaching for a strand of gold thread on her work table. Inder, she began carefully, our worlds are still very different. Your family, your social circle, they would never accept someone like me. I don't care what they accept, he replied firmly. And you might be surprised. My father, he's complicated. There's more to him than I realized. Priya was quiet for a long moment, the silks and threads around them seeming to absorb the tension in the air. When? She finally asked. Tomorrow evening, at our family home. She nodded slowly, her resolution forming. Then I should finish this by tomorrow, she said, gesturing to a length of deep blue silk with intricate golden patterns that she had been working on. If I am to meet Vikram Bajaj, I will not arrive empty-handed. The Bajaj family mansion stood on a hill overlooking the Arabian Sea, its elegant architecture blending colonial and traditional Indian influences. As Inder's car passed through the imposing gates, he glanced at Priya beside him. She wore a sari of her own creation, deep blue silk with golden peacocks and vines woven through the border. The craftsmanship so extraordinary that it outshone any designer piece money could buy. Her hair was styled simply but elegantly, adorned with a single white jasmine flower. Are you nervous? He asked softly. No, she replied, though her hands clutched a carefully wrapped package in her lap. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I will meet your father as myself, not trying to be something I'm not. Her strength amazed him. In her place, many would have been intimidated by the wealth and power of the Bajaj family. But Priya carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew her own worth, a worth that couldn't be measured in rupees or real estate. Inside, housekeepers and staff bowed respectfully as they entered. Inder guided Priya through the marble-floored entryway, past priceless artworks and antiques, to a formal sitting room where Vikram waited. The elder Bajaj stood as they entered, his posture straight and proud, his silver hair gleaming in the soft light. Father, this is Priya Nair, Inder said, his voice steady. Priya, my father, Vikram Bajaj. Vikram studied Priya with the calculating gaze that had intimidated business rivals for decades. But if Priya felt intimidated, she showed no sign of it. Namaste, Mr. Bajaj, she said, touching her palms together in respectful greeting. Thank you for inviting me to your home. Namaste, Miss Nair, Vikram replied, returning the gesture with formality. "My son speaks quite highly of your work. He tells me you are a master artisan." "I am still learning," Priya said modestly, "but I have been fortunate to inherit my family's traditions." She extended the package she had been carrying. "This is for you, a small token of appreciation for your hospitality." Vikram accepted the gift with a raised eyebrow, carefully unwrapping it to reveal the length of blue silk with golden embellishments that Priya had completed just hours before. He ran his fingers over the fabric, his expression impossible to read. "You created this?" he asked, examining the intricate peacock designs. "Yes. Each pattern has meaning in our tradition. The peacock represents renewal and immortality. The vines symbolize growth and connection." Something shifted in Vikram's eyes, a subtle softening that Inder had rarely seen. "My wife, Inder's mother, she had a fondness for hand-woven textiles. Before she passed, she often spoke of how machine-made goods could never capture the soul that artisans weave into their creations." This was another revelation for Inder. His mother had died when he was very young, and his father rarely spoke of her. "Please sit," Vikram continued, gesturing to the elegant sofas. As they settled, servants appeared with chai and traditional sweets. "Tell me, Miss Nair, what do you think of my son's proposal for Dharavi?" It was a loaded question, potentially a trap, but Priya answered honestly. "I think it shows vision and compassion," she said. "Most developers see only the land value, not the human and cultural value of what already exists there. Inder saw both and found a way to preserve what matters while still creating progress." Vikram nodded slowly. "And what matters to you, Miss Nair?" "My craft, my community, the knowledge passed down to me that I must pass on to others. These things cannot be replaced once lost." "Indeed." Vikram set down his cup with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when I was a young man, my father took me to see a master weaver in Varanasi. The man was creating a wedding sari so complex that each inch took days to complete. I asked my father why anyone would spend so much on something when machine-made alternatives existed. Do you know what he said?" Both Inder and Priya shook their heads. He said, "Some things are valuable precisely because they cannot be rushed or replicated. Their worth is in the human spirit they contain." Vikram's eyes moved to the silk Priya had gifted him. "I had forgotten that lesson. In building our empire, perhaps we lost sight of certain intangible values." The conversation continued through the evening, moving from business to philosophy, from the challenges facing traditional artisans to the potential for innovation that respected heritage. To Inder's amazement, his father listened to Priya with genuine interest, sometimes challenging her ideas but always with respect. As the evening drew to a close, Vikram accompanied them to the door. There, he surprised them both by taking Priya's hands in his. "Ms. Nair, you have reminded an old man of something important," he said, his voice gruff with emotion rarely displayed. "And you have helped my son find a vision worthy of the Bajaj name, not just wealth building, but legacy building." He turned to Inder, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The Cultural Heritage District will need a dedicated director, someone who lives in both worlds and understands what is truly at stake. I believe you have found that person already." With that cryptic statement, he bid them good night, leaving Inder and Priya to contemplate his meaning as they drove back toward the city. Months passed, and the Dharavi Cultural Heritage District began to take shape. The development proceeded in careful phases to minimize disruption to the community. Artisans were consulted at every stage, their knowledge and needs informing the design of workshops, teaching spaces, and living quarters. Priya emerged as a natural leader, initially hesitant but growing into the role of liaison between the developers and the artisan community. Her insight proved invaluable, helping to avoid pitfalls that could have derailed the project. Gradually, even the most skeptical artisans began to believe that this development might truly be different, that it might preserve rather than destroy what they valued most. Inder, meanwhile, found himself transformed by the project. He was still the heir to Bajaj Industries, still attended board meetings and made strategic decisions, but he now spent much of his time in Dharavi, working alongside the community rather than above it. The distance between his two worlds was shrinking, bridge by bridge. His relationship with Priya deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They worked together daily, their shared vision creating a bond that transcended their different backgrounds. Yet both were cautious, aware of the complexities that still existed. One evening, as the first completed building of the Cultural Heritage District was illuminated for the first time, casting a warm glow over the area, Inder found Priya standing alone on the rooftop terrace, gazing out at the skyline where modern skyscrapers and traditional structures coexisted in the twilight. "It's really happening," she said, as he joined her at the railing. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." Inder smiled, looking out at what they had accomplished together. "Believing in possibilities beyond what seems fixed. That's something you taught me." She turned to him, her face softened by the golden light. "And you taught me that not all change is destruction. Some change can be preservation." The moment stretched between them, filled with everything still unspoken. Inder took her hand gently, and she didn't pull away. "Priya, these months working with you, they've shown me what kind of life I want, not divided between worlds, but bringing them together." He hesitated, gathering courage. "I love you. I think I have since that first day in your workshop, surrounded by threads of gold and possibility." Her eyes shimmered with emotion, but hesitation lingered. "Inder, I love you too. But your world is changing," he finished for her, "and so is yours. We're creating something new together, something that honors the past while building the future." From his pocket, he drew out a small box. Inside was a ring, unlike any other, a band of gold so intricately worked that it resembled a miniature version of the borders Priya wove into her finest saris. "I commissioned this from Master Yoshi, who said his grandfather made something similar a lifetime ago." He held it up, the craftsmanship catching the light. "It's not about wealth or status. It's about continuity, honoring what came before while creating something new." Priya's breath caught as she recognized the traditional patterns worked into the modern design. "It's beautiful." "Will you marry me, Priya?" Inder asked, his voice carrying all the hope and transformation of the past months. "Not as a Bajaj bringing you into my world, or me entering yours, but as partners creating our own path." For a long moment, Priya was silent, tears welling in her eyes. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above them, witnesses to a union that once would have seemed impossible. The wedding preparations became a celebration not just of Inder and Priya's union, but of the successful merging of tradition and innovation that the Cultural Heritage District represented. To everyone's surprise, Vikram Bajaj threw himself into the arrangements with unexpected enthusiasm. "If my son is to marry," he announced, "it will be a wedding that honors both families' traditions. The Bajaj name will celebrate the artistry that Ms. Nair represents." And so it was that artisans from Dharavi found themselves working alongside luxury wedding planners, their craftsmanship showcased on a scale they had never imagined. The ceremony would be held in the central courtyard of the newly completed Cultural Heritage District, a symbol of the bridge Inder and Priya had built between their worlds. On the morning of the wedding, Priya sat in a room filled with female relatives and friends who had helped her prepare. She wore a wedding sari of deep red with gold embroidery that she had woven herself, incorporating patterns from both her family's traditions and subtle motifs that represented her journey with Inder. A knock at the door revealed Vikram Bajaj, looking distinguished in traditional wedding attire. "May I speak with you a moment?" he asked, unexpectedly diffident. When they were alone, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I wanted to give you something before the ceremony." From a carved wooden box, he withdrew a necklace of gold and rubies, antique but exquisitely preserved. "This belonged to Inder's mother. She would have wanted you to have it." Priya touched the necklace with reverent fingers. "It's too precious. It belongs with someone who understands its value beyond the price of the gold and stones," Vikram insisted, "and someone who knows that its worth lies in the hands that crafted it, the love it represents." As he fastened it around her neck, he added quietly, "You have given my son something I could not, a connection to what truly matters." For that, I will always be grateful. The ceremony itself was a perfect blend of tradition and personal significance. As Inder and Priya took their 7 steps together around the sacred fire, each step representing a promise for their life ahead, they were surrounded by people from both their worlds, corporate executives seated beside master artisans, celebrities alongside weavers and potters. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came after the formal ceremony, when they walked together through the Dharavi Cultural Heritage District, now alive with workshops, schools, and community spaces. Children scattered flower petals before them, and artisans displayed their finest work in a spontaneous exhibition honoring the couple who had helped preserve their way of life. At one point, they paused before a newly installed plaque at the district's entrance. It read, "Where tradition and innovation meet, true wealth is found. May all who enter here discover the golden thread that connects past and future." Inder squeezed Priya's hand, both of them understanding the deeper meaning. They had found that golden thread in each other, a connection that honored tradition while weaving a new pattern for the future. As they continued their procession through streets alive with celebration, the setting sun bathed everything in a golden glow, as if blessing the union not just of 2 people, but of 2 worlds that had found harmony without losing their essence. And in that moment, surrounded by joy and possibility, Inder and Priya knew that their story was just beginning. A story as rich and complex as the most beautiful sari, with threads of gold running through even the darkest patterns, creating beauty that would endure long after they were gone. The lost billionaire had indeed had his heart stolen in Dharavi, but in return, he had found something far more precious, a vision of a world where wealth was measured not just in money, but in knowledge, tradition, and love, a lesson woven into the very fabric of their shared destiny. Thank you for watching this heart-stirring story. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of the story. Also, click on the video appearing on your screen to continue the journey with us. See you in the next story.